If you make $100,000 a year, how much house does that really buy you in the city of Ottawa? Now, $100,000 a year, that's a big number when you think about it. And that number used to scream middle-class comfort. A yard, a driveway, maybe even, if you're lucky, a finished basement. But now fast forward to 2025 and that dream had to adjust massively. My name is Fadi Kuder, I'm your Ottawa realtor, and today I'm breaking down what $100,000 a year actually gets you when it comes to you purchasing a home and your purchasing power. Let's talk a little bit more about the income and the math behind it. When you take $100,000 a year, give or take, that's roughly about $6,000 in gross monthly income. We're gonna divide that into about 35%, let's say 40% in housing. You're looking at about $2,600 to $2,800 when it comes to what you could spend on a housing. Does that sound about fair? Perfect. Now let's start with what's happening in Ottawa right now, right in this market, and what would $100,000 really get you? If we start taking a look at the numbers that came out by the Ottawa Real Estate Board in May 2025, the average home price is about $728,623. When you look at townhouses, the average roughly is about $550,000. And when we start digging into the condos, we're probably looking around the $447,000, and that's between both apartment condos and also condo style townhouses. Now, with that being said, here's what you can actually afford and what sacrifices come with each one of these options. So we're gonna dig into it from the top. We'll start with the most ideal that everybody wants to talk about, and everybody that calls me day in, day out are looking for their own simple detached home. The benchmark pricing for a detached home in the city of Ottawa is roughly around the $700,000. And that's just the benchmark price. What that gets you is about a 3-bedroom with 2 bath, roughly around 1,400 square feet. That sounds about a nice home. Now, it might need some love, it might need some TLC, but that's besides the point. When you put down 10% on that house, you're probably looking at about $4,200 a month in terms of mortgage payment, and that is absolutely not feasible or ideal on $100K alone. But you know what? I've got an alternate strategy for you. If you go out 45 to 60 minutes outside of the city, places like Carleton Place, Arnprior on the west end of the city, or Limoges, Rockland, and Russell on the east end of the city will start making more and more sense, and you might be able to find yourself something that could fit. What about option number 2? The dreaded townhouse with multiple different houses right next to it. That option becomes a little bit more realistic when you start looking at that $100,000 mark. The benchmark price for a townhouse is roughly around $550,000, which if we put down about 10%, and you're financing it over 25 to 30 years, you're probably looking at about $2,500 a month, which is a bit of a stretch, but it's ideal and it's something that you could work with. That will give you roughly about a 3-bedroom home, 1.5 bath, give or take about 1,200 square feet, which is ideal, and it's a right fit for a first-time home buyer. Now, obviously, the obvious choice for everybody is a detached home. And there's a lot of pros and cons for each one of those. But as you can see, we can't really afford a detached home, can we? As much as I would love to set you guys up with one of those, it's very hard to do that on that $100,000. Now, let me just break it down for you when it comes to some of the pros and cons for maybe owning a townhouse. Because, just because you can't get to the best, you might go with the second best, which is the townhouse. It's affordable. You got a garage. Sometimes you might be able to get a new build. And some of them are available, especially if you're going on the east end, like places, for example, like Rockland, with maybe a home association of $100 or so, but it's definitely something workable. When you start looking at the cons that come with that, definitely it's smaller. You don't have your own, massive big backyard. You're sharing the backyard, or that backyard is yours, but it's a bit smaller. And you might be having some condo fees if it's not a freehold. And that brings me down to my third option, which is an apartment or a condo style townhouse. Average price roughly is around $404,700. When you look at that in terms of what you could afford, it's about $2,400 a month, give or take, in terms of the mortgage. What that really gets you today is about 1 and 2 bedrooms, depending on the style, 1 bath, and ideally around 900, 700 square feet, depending on, again, the style and what type of dwelling it is. An underground parking that possibly be ideal. And this is something that I would really urge you, if you're buying a condo, don't ever buy one that does not have a parking spot. Now, there are some advantages to this. Don't get me wrong, like I'm not gonna be the one that's gonna discount it, because sometimes you really gotta start somewhere. You can buy these inside the city, right inside the Greenbelt, in places like Westboro, Little Italy, the Byward Market. We can even look at townhouses around the south end of the city. You can even look at condo townhouses that are around possibly the Canada area. They are within that sort of budget that you're looking for. The trade-off is the condo fees. You're probably looking between $400 to $600 condo fees, and some apartment buildings, they could reach up to $1,000 when it comes to the condo fees, and a lot of smaller living spaces. And don't forget the hidden costs that come with that. One of the biggest things that we really don't like about condo fees is that they're always on the increase, and they're always moving up depending on how many services you have attached to that condo. Especially if you're in an apartment condo, you might tend to have a lot of more amenities and more services that are associated and wrapped in within that condo fee. So you always want to be on the lookout for that, and this is where doing the homework ahead would be really beneficial for you. With that being said, as much as it's not an ideal start, it's still really good to be able to get into a place, something that you could call home. And ideally, whichever option you choose, the closing costs that come with it that are always going to be there, make sure that you get yourself comfortable with that budget, that you're not necessarily overstretched. And this is where, for someone that's making about $100,000 or so, I do not recommend stretching your budget to a townhouse. Maybe stick within that condo townhouse. When you start looking at the market, I'm just going to kind of go back a little bit. When you're looking at the market in May 2025 and some of the factors that affected this in a good way, inventory is up about 13.5%. Buyers today have a lot more choice. It's more of a buyer's market than anything. The sale to list price, it's actually about 98.8%. Like if you're listing it, let's say at $100,000, not that we can find any properties at $100,000, but let's just say that was the case, you might be able to sell it for around $98,000 or so. It's still competitive, very competitive pricing. And the other thing too is the Bank of Canada had decided to hold the rates a little bit. Now, don't quote me on this because they can change their mind like the weather, and it give the consumer like yourself a lot of confident boost to be able to go back and get into the market. And we've seen this lately because it looks like we've never had a spring market, and the spring market actually shifted into late June and on. With all of this being said, what can you actually buy with $100,000 a year in Ottawa?